Yeah, this is a big development that's coming in from the Supreme Court Collegium, which had met earlier this afternoon. The meeting having concluded. They have in principle now agreed to reiterate in once again suggesting Justice K.M. Joseph's name, but have decided to send it back later. Some other names for appointments at Supreme Court judges would be sent across. Other names, decision on which is to be taken on May 16. Till then, we would have Justice Joseph's name not sent with immediate effect to the government. In principle, though, the Collegium has decided that this would be a second recommendation of resending his name for elevation to the Supreme Court. We have with us correspondent Aarti getting us further details on what this means. Aarti, what would be that given date when the second time recommendation would be sent across? Because it would mean then that if the name goes across for the second recommendation, the government would then simply just have to take up the name.
Yes, what we're understanding from the court, from Meenakshi, of course, is that the Collegium has given an in-principle approval to reiterate Justice K.M. Joseph's name for this elevation to the Supreme Court. There is another meeting slated for May 16th where the nomination of certain other judges will be taken up, and it is widely expected that Justice Joseph's nomination will be sent to the government on this particular date, that's on May 16th. Of course, once the name goes back to the government, they're duty-bound to accept its recommendation. They cannot reject the recommendation of a judge once it's been reiterated by a collegium. So this is largely expected to happen on May 16th. Meenakshi will probably have us more details on that meeting slated for May 16th.
Okay. All right. Aarti, any information on the understanding on why it has decided to put it back to a later date, which is the 16th of May? They would first prefer to send in another set of recommendations before his name goes across for the second time.
Well, we're given to understand that there is a meeting on May 16th in which the recommendation or the decision on certain other judges is pending. So I think they've decided to club Justice K.M. Joseph's decision along with those and send all these nominations together collectively to the government on May 16th, as is being reported. But Meenakshi will probably have more details on what led the Collegium to really decide to separate, or rather to not separate the cases and club all of them together on May 16th.
All right. Well, Aarti, stay with us. We're going to be very quickly be connected with Meenakshi, our deputy news editor as well, who's getting us further details from the Supreme Court on these developments. But Aarti, this effectively means, of course, that the Collegium is to reiterate their choice, K.M. Joseph. The first time around, of course, when his name was recommended, in very clear terms, it was stated the most worthy candidate. So they, of course, have decided to stay with that decision and recommend his name the second time round as well.
Yes, of course, Seher. The government earlier arguing that the Supreme Court requires, there are other judges who are senior to Justice Joseph, and, you know, there has to be diversity in the bench, and that's why they really opposed his elevation. But with this particular reiteration, it seems that the Supreme Court seems to suggest that, you know, Justice Joseph, of course, is the most worthy, and they haven't really bought into the government's arguments that seniority or diversity needs to be represented on the bench. Now, as I mentioned earlier, once the Collegium recommends a particular name, it's duty bound on the government to accept the recommendation, and they cannot really return this. So there almost is a stage set here for a confrontation, possible confrontation, to be fair, between the judiciary and the executive on Justice K.M. Joseph's elevation to the Supreme Court.
All right, these are big developments here that are coming in with respect to the Collegium's decision on Justice K.M. Joseph's appointment here being reconsidered by the Collegium, standing by their earlier decision the first time around on why his name was recommended. They're standing by that decision, and his name would be sent across after the meeting on the 16th of May. This would be a second time recommendation. Aarti, it's important here. This is an interesting development here because once again you have the Supreme Court reiterating, the Collegium reiterating here that it was a fine decision, it was a fine worthy candidate which was recommended by them, and the central government now, with the second time around, will just simply have to accept it.
Yes, that's right, Seher. The government, of course, is duty-bound to accept the recommendation once it's been reiterated by the Collegium. I think Meenakshi joining us on the phone line, and she probably has more on what exactly the Collegium really decided, why they decided to club all these cases together instead of re-recommending only Justice Joseph today.
Well, Aarti, we are coming to you from the Supreme Court, and yes, the Collegium did meet. Justice K.M. Joseph's case is the most curious case. Of course, there are other cases also which the Collegium, we are being given to understand, is considering for elevation to the Supreme Court. Now, the big breaking news for our viewers is this, Aarti. Though there has not been a specific reiteration yet, because there is another high-profile meeting which is on the cards for the 16th of May, but very highly placed sources within the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court Collegium have given a clear indication to us that the four senior members of the Supreme Court Collegium, which comprises Honorable Justice Madan Lokur, Honorable Justice Ranjan Gogoi, Honorable Justice Kurian Joseph, and Honorable Justice Ranjan Gogoi, Aarti, they are of the mind, and they are in agreement that in principle they have decided to reiterate or re-emphasize the choice of Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph, former Chief Justice of Uttarakhand High Court, for elevation to Supreme Court. But the catch here is they are waiting for the 16th May meeting to also take place, so that the other names that they wish to recommend to the government from various other high courts for the purpose of elevation to the Supreme Court can also be added to the name of Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph. So the Collegium understands one thing, Aarti, which is this, that tempers are running high perhaps. There is a lot of speculation rife in all spectrums of life about this purported, perceived and alleged interference of the executive into the domain of the judiciary, especially pertaining to judicial appointments. We have seen some very high profile retired judges also speak their mind on the issue, and the Collegium does not for now want to exacerbate the situation. It wants to proceed about its job in a very business-like manner, and therefore it wants to maintain the decorum of how things are done. So the big news here, there are two takeaways. One, Aarti, in principle, it has been decided within the closed doors that Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph's name will be reiterated to the government for elevation as being the unanimous choice of the Collegium. However, there is another crucial high-profile meeting which is on the cards for the 16th of May, during which the Collegium members will decide upon the other names from various other high courts for elevation to the Supreme Court. So the Collegium till then is keeping its cards close to its chest, but again we emphasize for Mirror Now viewers that there is this element of consensus that has been arrived at about Justice K.M. Joseph's name being reiterated in principle. So it's perhaps just a matter of time before it plays out. But yes, Aarti, this is one a contentious, sticky candidature which has brought the Supreme Court Collegium in direct collision course with the executive. And of course, this is so high stake, and therefore there is more reason for better coordination, for better application of mind, and for really things to not proceed in a hostile manner. The Collegium is very responsible, or wants to be very responsible about that, and therefore we will perhaps be seeing a reaffirmation very soon in the foreseeable future. Although we emphasize that the big news is this, that in principle they've had a consensus amongst themselves. These are the top 5 senior judges of the Supreme Court that we are talking about. It is not a political party. It is not a very commonplace occurrence, Aarti, that we are bringing to our viewers, because these meetings are all hush-hush. They are closed doors. They are conducted in chambers, and there is no formal communication really from the Collegium about what essentially transpires. Of course, there will be perhaps some sort of a resolution or a formal note which everybody is expecting would be made available on the Supreme Court website very soon. Aarti.
Right, Meenakshi. So this effectively means that apart from the other senior important names that the Collegium wants to go ahead and recommend as well for nomination into the Supreme Court. It would be Justice K.M. Joseph's name that the central government would now, the second time, have no choice whether to decide to pick or not. The other names, they would have a choice to decide, but with his name, they would simply now just need to, just have to take up that recommendation.
Well, Seher, yes, indeed, the other names are not sticky, contentious at this juncture, because remember, the other names have not been segregated allegedly by the executive class, in this particular instance, the central government. Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph, former Chief Justice of Uttarakhand High Court, his name has been segregated, and even that process of segregation has come in for a considerable amount of scrutiny, debate, and also criticism from various quarters, including former Chief Justice of India, Honorable Justice Rajendra Mal Lodha, Honorable former Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, Justice A.P. Shah, all have been on record. And as recently as last week, Seher, it was Honorable Justice Kurian Joseph, one of the sitting judges of the Supreme Court Collegium, while he was on a trip to Kochi in his hometown, he had addressed the media there and had categorically cited his displeasure about the manner in which the names were segregated, pointing out that this segregation of names, there were two candidates who were proposed for elevation to the Supreme Court. Honorable now Justice Indu Malhotra, whose candidature went by without any glitches, and the other was Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph. Now, the problem arose when the differentiation between these two candidates happened without taking or bringing, as it is being alleged, the Honorable Chief Justice of India into confidence. Usual process which the jurors feel would have been a better course to adopt by the executive class would have been to write to the Honorable Chief Justice of India citing their grievances or reservations about Justice Joseph's candidature. That did not happen. Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph's name was sent back by the executive class in spite of him being a unanimous recommendation of the Collegium, and that is why this is a sticky, contentious case. It is disparate or different from the other recommendations of the Collegium, and this case of Honorable Justice K.M. Joseph is the case which is being perceived by all in the legal fraternity as being an instance of alleged executive overreach. Back to you.
All right, this being the big decision, of course, that has been taken by the Collegium. Meenakshi, help us understand on why a further next meeting to make this announcement then, along with other recommended names on the 16th of May, clubbing it with other recommendations as well, on why perhaps this could have not gone ahead as a standalone case.
Well, like we have been broadcasting to our viewers here, one cannot really ascertain the real reason behind it, but these are the five wise men of the Supreme Court. They comprise the Supreme Court Collegium, which is responsible for the appointment and transfer of judges, not just to the Supreme Court, but from one high court to the other high courts, alongside other administrative and judicial works. And of course, this is within the realm of their prerogative about the kind of message that they wish to send out to the executive class, like we have been again broadcasting on Mirror now with numerous debates that has been conducted by our executive editor Faye D'Souza with abundant number of jurists who have been on record to say that this sort of a flashpoint or a collision course, direct face-off between the executive and the judiciary is in nobody's interest, and that is what the Collegium also understands, and they want to adopt a future course of action which is moderate, which is reasonable, and which will see a lot of mulling over and application of their mind, and therefore they do not want to be seen to be taking any hasty decisions which puts them in a confrontational mode with the executive, because they do understand both the judiciary and the executive are parallels. They are so essential for upholding the constitutional values that has been envisaged originally by the makers of the Constitution, and therefore, Seher, although in principle there is agreement, but yet they are giving themselves time. They are also giving time to the executive to understand the ethos of their various decisions. Back to you.
Absolutely. Well, Deputy News Editor Meenakshi Banja, many thanks for those details coming in from outside the Supreme Court. Also, our correspondent Aarti with those inputs on this. With that, we're slipping into a very tiny breather. It's